subtopics in Chapter 5, Population Genetics. For the first subtopic, gene pool concept, make sure students able to understand some terminologies in this topic. To understand better about the topic population genetics, we need to understand the definition of population. Population refers to a group of individuals of the same species that live in a particular area. And this group of individuals, they're able to interbreed sexually to produce fertile offspring in nature. Genetics is a study of genes in a population, including distributions and changes in genotype and phenotype frequencies. These frequencies are closely related with the allele frequency, and the change of allele frequency will lead to evolution of a population. Terminology we need to master in this topic is gene pool, which is defined as the total of all alleles of all gene loci present in all individuals of a sexually reproducing population. We may understand the definition of gene pool easier through the gene pool calculation. When we say population, refer to a group of individuals with same species, and then they're able to reproduce sexually. So these individuals are considered as a diploid species. Diploid species means that if we study the gene, each individual carried two alleles for that particular genes. Such shown in this picture, when we study the fur color of a mouse, no matter what color of fur the mouse we have to study, each mouse, they carry the gene for fur color, and they have two alleles for that gene. So from here, if we study a population with only 10 individuals, and we have to find the gene pool. So the formula of the gene pool is the total of individuals multiplied by 2. So gene pool of this population will be 20 alleles. There are two types of frequencies play important role in population genetics, which are the allele frequency and the genotype frequency. For both frequencies, the minimum value or the lowest value is 0, and the maximum or the highest value is 1. Is defined as the ratio of total number of a particular allele to the total number of all alleles in the gene pool. However, genotype frequency is defined as the ratio of total number of individuals with a particular genotype to the total number of all individuals in a population. We are going to study more details in the next subtopic. In this subtopic, we are going to study the Hardy-Weinberg Law, and also to explain how the 5 assumptions of Hardy-Weinberg Law for genetic equilibrium. During tutorial classes, you are going to apply the Hardy-Weinberg Equation to solve the problems related with allele and genotype frequencies. Two scientists, they're able to introduce the mathematical relationship between allele and genotype frequencies in a population that has reached genetic equilibrium. But what is meant by a population that achieves genetic equilibrium or Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium? This Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium refers to the condition of a population in which the allele and genotype frequencies remain constant or do not change from generation to the next generation. This is because when we study population genetics, we refer to the individuals from a population, they are same species. So they're able to reproduce sexually and produce fertile offspring. Fertile offspring means they are new generation able to produce the next generation. But when we study their allele and genotype frequencies, we notice that these two frequencies do not change through generations. To Hardy-Weinberg, when a population achieves genetic equilibrium, it can be calculated through Hardy-Weinberg equation. The first Hardy-Weinberg equation related with allele frequency, whereas the lowercase letter p is the symbol of frequency of dominant allele, and the lowercase letter of q is the frequency of recessive allele. If the population achieves genetic equilibrium, these two frequencies, the total will become 1. Let's summarize the formula used to calculate the allele frequency, which are the frequency of dominant allele and the frequency of recessive allele. For the blue-footed booby, there are two types of feet. The feet with no webbing is the dominant phenotype, and the feet with webbing is the recessive phenotype. In Chapter 4, we understand that the organism with dominant phenotype may be homozygous dominant or heterozygous. This is because the dominant phenotype is controlled by dominant allele, which is always written with capital letter. And each organism, which is diploid organism, they will carry two alleles for this gene. However, the organism with recessive phenotype must be homozygous recessive, because the recessive allele can only be manifested when the dominant allele is absent. If we study a population that consists of 320 homozygous dominant organisms and 160 heterozygous blue-footed booby and 20 homozygous recessive, which contribute to the population size equal to 500. Population size means the total of individuals in the population. And the gene pool can be calculated with the formula total of individuals times 2. That's why in this case, the gene pool is 1000. And the total number of dominant allele and the total number of recessive allele can be calculated through this way. And if student able to find out the total number of dominant allele and the total number of recessive allele, and we substitute the values into the formula, so we will get the allele frequency in this outcome. The population that achieves genetic equilibrium can be proven through the second Hardy-Weinberg equation, which is related with the genotype frequencies. There are three types of genotype. This is why we have three genotype frequencies. Consists of p square, same with frequency of homozygous dominant, q square, which is the frequency of homozygous recessive, and 2pq is the frequency of heterozygous. Summarize the formula of calculating the frequency of homozygous dominant, which is p square, the frequency of homozygous recessive, which is q square, and the frequency of heterozygous, which is 2pq. The formula is different with the allele frequency because now we are going to count the individuals, the number of individuals, not more the number of alleles. So if we use the same case of the blue-footed booby, okay, so you will notice that we still use the case the population size equal to 500, which means there are 500 individuals in this population. And here is the full information about this population. So if we substitute the figures to the formula particularly, okay, this is our outcome of the three genotype frequencies. Hardy-Weinberg law applies only if there is genetic equilibrium achieved, which means no earlier frequency changes for the population. And there are 5 assumptions of Hardy-Weinberg law, which include large population size, random fertilization or random mating, no mutation, no migration, and no natural selection. And many scientists agree that the Hardy-Weinberg law is not applicable in nature because this is quite rare to observe a natural population to achieve all these 5 assumptions. The first assumption of Hardy-Weinberg law is large population size. This is because the earlier frequency in a small population are more likely to change by random fluctuation, which is called as genetic drift, which means the minor change in the frequency of allele is not significant in the large population. So you can study this sample by relating with the human population how the effect of population size to a gene pool. Genetic drift is defined as the changes in gene pool of a small population. If we study the sample of the rabbit population that consists of 10 individuals, which have two types of phenotype, the brown fur rabbit, which is the dominant phenotype because we notice that the individuals carry the dominant alleles. It may be homozygous dominant or it can be heterozygous. And we have two individuals with the recessive phenotype because they carry only the recessive alleles or homozygous recessive. So for the first generation, we notice that the frequency of dominant allele, which is P, and the frequency of recessive allele, which is Q, are equal to each other. And the total value of these two frequencies must be equal to 1. Okay, this is why we have 0.5 and 0.5. But in there are 5 rabbits from the first generation, they able to reproduce sexually and they form the second generation. In the second generation, we notice that the rabbit with dominant phenotype increase in number. That's why they contribute to the increasing of the frequency of dominant allele, which is represented by P, now is equal to 0.7. However, the frequency of recessive allele, which is represented by Q, is 0.3. And there are 2 rabbits, okay, both are brown fur, they reproduce sexually and form the third generation. So the third generation, we notice that none of it carried the recessive allele. This is implied by the values of the frequency of recessive allele, which is the Q, they equal to 0. And now the frequency of dominant allele, which is represented by P, has the highest value, which is 1. Is random fertilization or random mating. Individuals must not select mate on the basis of genotype or any other factors. Or it can be also considered as any gamete has equal probability of fertilizing any other gamete, or each individual in a population has equal chance of mate with any individual of opposite sex. So in random mating, for example, this insect, they have the equal chance to mate with another insect with opposite sex without the consideration of their phenotypes or other factors. But in non-random mating, the individuals tend to choose mates similar to themselves. Mutation can modify gene pool because mutation means that the changes of the normal allele to a mutated allele. So, to achieve the genetic equilibrium according to Hardy-Weinberg Law, the next assumption is no mutation for the population. That's why the frequency of alleles will be constant from one generation to the next generation. So here is the example of the effects of mutation to the gene pool. Can change the allele frequencies also. So to achieve a genetic equilibrium, there was no migration in that population, and then no exchange of the allele with other population. So the gene flow does not occur. Natural selection is actually an evolutionary process that promotes individuals with greater fitness to survive, so they have the chance to become mature and can reproduce sexually to produce the fertile offspring that carry the genes. In short, this is a process that selects for the favorite phenotype. So, to achieve genetic equilibrium, the population do not undergo natural selection, which means all the individuals in the population, they do not show differential survival and reproductive success. All individuals have the equal chance to survive and to reproduce and pass the genes or the alleles to the next generation. So the allele frequencies remain constant and the population is not evolved.